Hello, everyone. My name is Niraj, and this is a social entrepreneurship panel with Professor Nejla Routsong and Wang. And, we'll be starting with the land acknowledgement. So we wish to acknowledge and honor the Miami, Delaware, Potawatomi, and Shawnee people on whose ancestral homelands and resources Indiana University Bloomington is built upon. And with that, let me introduce you to our panelists. So we have Wang, who is the co-founder and CEO of Civic Champs. Gong is proven serial entrepreneur. He has multiple successful startup exits, one being runjungle.com and another being a digital marketing sort of promoting thing. And he is an ex engagement manager from McKinsey and also has an MBA from Harvard Business School. And our other panelist is Professor Nejla Routsong. She is, professor. She has taught courses in politics, philosophy, economics, and business. And she also started a social venture in Washington, D.C. And, with that, let's get started for the panel. So the panel basically talks about the importance of social entrepreneurship in today's society. And we'll be discussing, emerging concepts in social enterprises, innovation, corporate social responsibility, and also social impact. And with that, I guess we can get started with the panelists. First, let me start off with Gong. Gong, if you could, tell us a little bit about, about yourself and your story and how you got to the point at which you are today.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Niraj. It's awesome to be here today. Hi everyone. So my name's Gung. If it's easier to remember, it's pronounced like Gung Ho. And so my story, I think Niraj already highlighted. I was previously a management consultant for a number of years with McKinsey & Company, and then did some tech startups, one called Rent Jungle, another called Community Elf. Both we were fortunate. We sold both, one in 2014 and one in 2017. And so, really was looking to do something entrepreneurial again a couple of years ago, but wanted to do something that had a bit more social impact. And so that's, how we landed on Civic Champs to some degree. We can go into some of the founding stories and things like that. But based here in Bloomington. We're about 2 years old, and basically what we do is we provide software for nonprofits to better manage and engage their volunteers.
Yeah, that's great. Nejla, could you also, tell us a little bit about yourself and your story?
Yes, thanks. Thanks, Niraj. So I'm an Indiana native. I grew up in Northern Indiana. My background is different from probably a lot of business people, because I didn't go to business school and then go into business. I actually have a liberal arts background. I studied philosophy, politics, and economics before working or studying in business. And then I sort of fell into business. It turned out I was good at digital marketing, and my ADHD was like an asset in that industry. And so I kind of just ended up having to work in digital marketing. And then after a few years of doing that, I thought, well, I might as well get an MBA. My company's going to pay for it. Next thing I knew, I was studying entrepreneurship at Ball State with Michael Goldsby, who's a great professor there. He actually has a course on great courses in entrepreneurship, and he wrote a book on design-centered entrepreneurship. And that's actually the model that I adapted for the Mandela Fellows recently for social impact. So I sort of came at things the other way, but I also have had the help that my dad had been a small landlord when I was growing up, and so about 5 years ago, when I stopped being an itinerant backpacker, I finally decided to settle in Bloomington, and I bought a multifamily, just a triplex. And I luckily have some skills from growing up with my dad, and I'm doing some of that myself and working on that property. So yeah, I'm also currently hoping to develop a sustainable housing property here in Bloomington. Yeah, so that's my background.
Very cool. Yeah, so I guess I'll start off with entrepreneurship. You mentioned you studied that, post undergrad. So I was just curious, how would you sort of define entrepreneurship, and how would you sort of differentiate social entrepreneurship and traditional entrepreneurship?
For me?
Yeah, you can go, and then Gang can.
Yeah, so I would define entrepreneurship as anyone who can create value, right, for people. Social entrepreneurship is specifically concerned with maximizing social value, whereas traditional entrepreneurship is associated more with private value, private economic value. And yeah, I mean, for me, that's the main difference. I mean, the terms, are sometimes interchangeable. I don't think we necessarily have to separate out social entrepreneurship, but I really do think there's a huge value when you talk about impact, to really make sure how you're what you're counting and what you're measuring.
Right, and go.
Yeah, so it's hard to follow up a professor with a definition, right? So that's the right answer, but I'll just add my 2 cents, which is, I think for me, entrepreneurship, right, is around starting something new, right? And that could be whether that's a tech entrepreneurship or whatever it is, right? Starting your, something new that doesn't exist today, right? That's sort of how I think about it. And social entrepreneurship, right? Again, I think Nejla thinks about it right in the right way, which is it's essentially the same thing, except you're really trying to look to start something that is focused on providing value or benefits to society in some way, right? And so whether that's for a target population or whether that's for a community in general, right? Any of that probably would fall in that definition.
Right, no, exactly. And Nejla, you talked a little bit about design-centered entrepreneurship. Could you maybe elaborate a little bit more on what exactly that is and what are the parts that go into that?
Sure. Yeah, so design-centered entrepreneurship comes from the field of design thinking applied to entrepreneurship, and very specifically to the innovation process. Okay, the business innovation process. And so you've probably done it before without realizing, because design thinking has just totally infiltrated, as far as I can tell, most of the business industries at this point. But it's basically where, you look at, you basically frame your development process as like a problem solving process. And you very kind of scientifically and meticulously make sure you're defining the right problem, make sure you're viewing the problem from the perspective of the right people, right? From the stakeholders' perspective. And then you move on to trying to solve the problem. But again, everything is very methodological. And so it sort of mixes design thinking and sociology a little bit, that in that respect, in that you don't assume anything and you get, evidence for things. You do lots of research, and then of course it's an iterative process. And so you do a lot of diverging and then converging. So for instance, to decide what the problem is, for example, you may bring a lot of people together from the company and have everyone sort of brainstorm and, think of 20 or 30 or more problems at first. And then you find a way to converge, right? And choose the best problem or the actual one. And so, yeah, you just go through a lot of diverging and converging and verifying. And it sounds really boring and methodological, but it's actually not. It's actually really fun. And I was really happy that I got to design my housing development that I mentioned earlier, the canopy, in my entrepreneurship MBA courses. And I got to use that as an example in all of my courses. And yeah, I found it really, I found design-centered entrepreneurship is a natural fit with social entrepreneurship. That's why I applied it in the Mandela Fellows Institute this summer, because what design-centered entrepreneurship does is it really engages and maximizes your engagement with the community, the entire community, and takes all the best ideas from you. That's what this process is designed to do, is to get all the best ideas from anyone in the community who can lend those ideas to your business and then apply that to your business. So to me, it makes even more sense to apply this in a social entrepreneurship lens, because why not take all the community's ideas to help the community?
Right. So it's basically taking, community problems and making that into community-led solutions, which is, I think, a great thing. And Gang, I wanted to ask you, you sort of talked about Civic Champs earlier, but just to dive a little more deep into that, what is the problem you're trying to solve, and what was the inspiration for Civic Champs?
Yeah, so there's a number of the main problem, I think, is that when you think about the process of volunteering or giving your time, there's a lot of points of friction in that whole process, right? And so
Sure.
whether that is finding the right opportunity, whether that is showing up and tracking your time and then submitting it back in the paper forms, whether that is the ongoing engagement that folks have. And that's just a side that you see as a volunteer, right? From the nonprofit side, which is where our main focus is today, right? All of those papers, sign-in sheets that you have, right? Like something happens to them, right? And so the example I like to give is if you try to imagine a Starbucks or a CVS, right? Trying to manage its customer loyalty program using pen and paper, right? That's just not fathomable to most folks, right? And so why should we expect nonprofits essentially to lack those same tool sets, right? And so that's really what we're here about. Is we think that people that do good deserve great technology, and so we're here to provide that. Inspiration, I guess, was the second part. Is I had a friend who was playing Pokemon Go, and I never played, and I'm very interested in tech generally, and I thought, I'm willing to try and experience this new gaming platform. And so one of the things I loved about the game is that it actually forces you to walk around, right? Like there's actual physical benefits to playing a game that you don't get anywhere else. And at the same time, I was putting together a corporate social responsibility program for a company. And so volunteering was sort of top of mind for me, and so, seeing some of these pain points. And our original concept was to create a mobile game, the Pokemon Go for volunteerism, right? So you can, sort of play in short segments, but actually do good for society in some way. And what happened was I interviewed, right, a bunch of nonprofits, executive directors, volunteer coordinators, because I don't know how to manage volunteers. I don't know how to engage them. I don't know how to recruit them. I said, hey, will you help me out? I have this great idea, but you guys are the experts. And so when they described how they do it, I had this thought that's oh, wow, a lot of this seems very painful to them, right? Like it's not stuff that you enjoy, like manually typing in, Niraj, your 3 hours of volunteering yesterday, and then, tracking all of that is not fun. And so we thought, what if we converted some of the ideas we had for the game and did something that was sort of immediately impactful and beneficial to the nonprofit? So that's how we got to where we are today. And, we've sort of expanded upon that in different ways. And we're now layering back some more engagement elements for the volunteers, but we started with the nonprofits.
Yeah, no, it's really cool to see how Pokemon Go, played a part in getting that idea, and also how you're using tech to help nonprofits. I think that's really cool. I was just gonna follow up. How did you, identify stakeholders? Did you like always have that in mind that you wanted to do something in the nonprofit space and sort of help them with the tech that you provide?
No, like I said, I mean, it was very much a coincidence in some ways, right? That I knew I wanted to do something that had social impact, right? But
Hmm.
there's lots of ways to have impact, in terms of what you do. I knew I wanted to do something with tech, but sort of stumbled into this space specifically as we saw the pain points that they're facing, right? The business side of me obviously then did a little bit of math and said, how much are you willing to pay for this, right? Can we make this a sustainable enterprise, right? That kind of stuff. But yeah, I think it was allowing sort of the evidence or insights to shape the direction that we ultimately followed, which is, what can you actually do that provides value?
Right, exactly. And Nejla, I wanted to ask you this. How do you think social entrepreneurship drives innovation and change?
Well, the 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 main challenge I see for social entrepreneurship, and frankly, I think a lot of the potential that's still on the table in social entrepreneurship is in creating new disruptive business models
Mhm.
that will create business models that are not harmful to people and the planet, ideally beneficial. So, like net positive business models, I guess, socially net positive, which is frankly something that doesn't exist in most industries today. And so with that said, I mean, the bar is kind of low as far as making an impact. If you just want to do a little less harm, than current industry. So like one way that I like to describe it is with like building standards, because that's what I'm familiar with. So for instance, in the building industry, you can, there's like building up to code, and then less than that is technically illegal, but people do it anyway. And then there's, green, which is technically like doing something that's a little better for the planet, that's still up to code, but you're probably still overall harming the planet, right? Then there's sustainable, which is technically net zero, where you're like not doing any harm, it's impossible to get zero really. And so that's why when you want to be net zero, you aim for net positive, right? So you
Right.
right. And so with building, there's this idea of regenerative, and that's what I try to do with my social entrepreneurship models is go, okay, yeah, okay, we could do a little better, than most people, but for me, I like a challenge, and to me, what's more challenging than breaking business models, because I think that there's a real need for this, and I think social entrepreneurship is the right place for this to come from.
Yeah, like you said, there's definitely a real need for this. Do you think there's any sort of barriers to social entrepreneurship, or really what you can do with innovation in the current state?
Well, I think probably the biggest barrier is people simply accepting the status quo and thinking that because everyone else is doing something a certain way in that industry, that's the way it has to be done, or that's the way that you should do it, or whatever. But I have found, if you read a couple of sustainable economics books, Donut Economics is a pretty good one, right? They, you can pretty much create real parameters, around which you're, like I said before, where you're going from doing less harm to actually doing good. And in my opinion, we don't have time for the less harm approach anymore. The days when we could try to do a little less harm and think we were actually going to save the planet, I think are over. That time is gone. in my opinion, the advice that people give to business people to move fast and break things is, to me, that needs to be in response to this crisis, right? We need to move quickly to save our planet and the species, and we need to break the business models that are frankly harming the planet and our species. So I see that as like the biggest, I guess the biggest challenge, but also the biggest opportunity in social entrepreneurship, is getting over the status quo acceptance of the current way of doing things in many industries, which is frankly, it's like I said, it's just a very low bar that people have. And so to me, just going out there and raising the bar in whatever industry you're in, I mean, just, whatever you can do it.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, because I feel like a lot of companies are sort of being reactive instead of being proactive, but now is the time to act, and a lot of corporations just are being more proactive about sustainability and also social entrepreneurship. Gang, I also wanted to ask you the same question. When you were obviously founding Civic Champs, and when you were sort of developing it, did you sort of face any challenges, or were there any sort of barriers that you sort of had to deal with?
Specific to being a social entrepreneur versus a non-social entrepreneur? Is that the question, I guess?
Right, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so as context, Civic Champs is a benefit corporation, so we're a B Corp. And so that means we are a for-profit, but with a sort of baked in social mission, right? We have a director that is focused on our social mission, and we put out annual reports and things like that. But I would say the biggest challenge, right, with social impact organization is around just fundraising, right? Is just a little bit more challenging. I think it's less challenging today because the business community sees sort of some net benefits from a marketing standpoint, right? For social enterprises. But I think you get more questions, especially with us, right, where we serve the nonprofit space, that like, hey, can you not can you be sustainable, but like, if you really want to make a big impact and you're going for venture funding, right, can you truly make make a big business out of this, right? And they're very skeptical. And I would say in some ways you may actually need to have more traction, right? More revenue, more growth to sort of overcome that kind of inherent bias that people have, right? If I said, to you, hey, I'm going to start a business that serves nonprofits, your first question is probably like, nonprofits, do they have money, right? And so that's, I think, a particular challenge, right? And there's not as many funds that, there's a, and for venture, they always look at what has had historical success, right? And so if you don't have a lot of examples of historical success, it's hard for them to have that kind of conviction. So yeah, hopefully we'll be able to overcome that. But I think that's one of the bigger challenges, certainly compared to the other ventures I've done.
You just to follow up on that, do you think the government, can sort of play some role in helping promote more of these sort of corporations, or promoting B Corps, stuff that corporations that have a social mission? Can the government sort of do anything to encourage that?
I mean, sure, they can they can lower taxes. I suppose, right? Like there are some things that government could do to make it more feasible. But I would say, those are not going to be the things that really make the biggest difference, right? From a structural standpoint, unless you have a fund, right? Like, like the government has SBIR grants, which is to encourage research, R&D, and things like that. And so conceivably they could have some sort of climate fund or some other fund that does that invests in companies or enterprises that make an impact. So I think, those are probably some of the things from an incentive standpoint, right, that you could do.
Yeah, no, I agree. And Nejla, you talked a little bit about this earlier, but how do you take, community problems and make them into solutions? What's the sort of a process to really dive deeper into the solution?
How do you take a community problem and do a deeper dive.
Right.
Yeah, well, ideally you can get all the important people in one room. That's always the best way if possible. You know, do a half a day event or something like that. If that's not possible, you know, whatever you can do, even if it's online. Yeah, but doing some sort of, you know, some real problem exploration, you know, possibly in groups, facilitated in small groups, you know, make sure you're getting, yeah, as much detail and individual insights. Something that I stress in my teaching on this is to take special care to include formerly marginalized groups in the community who have been left out of that particular industry in the past. So for instance, I was talking about my real estate development, and there was a class at IU who was helping me brainstorm, Thomas Landis's class, and they were helping me brainstorm anti-gentrification ideas for planning a development. And so that would have me talking with local senior, like elderly and senior citizens in the neighborhood where we're going to develop, and find out what kind of value we could bring to their life with our property, you know. And so, yeah, I guess making sure you talk to the people who you normally wouldn't think of as your stakeholders, right? People who have been formerly excluded is a big one. And so that makes sure, you know, you're reaching out to, you know, people with disabilities, racial minority groups, things like that. Women, shout out for women as a minority. And yeah, try to get everyone in the room and hear what they have to say. And, you know, another good tip that Michael Goldsby teaches in his process of design-centered entrepreneurship is to physically go as much as you can and experience what your stakeholders are experiencing, you know. So whether that means, if it's a product, make sure you go there and you actually use it from their perspective. Or if you're working with, let's say you're trying to, you know, you're trying to work with the unhoused community, maybe you go and live in that community to try to experience the challenges they face on a day-to-day basis, because you'll learn more that way and you may have more insights, right? And there's some things that frankly people don't want to talk about, and those are usually the best things for business people to know when they're developing a product. That's usually what's going to give you the edge. So doing an experiential visit, gaining trust from stakeholders so that they trust you enough to share those important details with you is the advice I'd have.
Yeah, no, I think it's definitely important for, you know, for entrepreneurs to engage with their stakeholders so they get a better idea of the community they're serving and develop more effective solutions. I was also going to ask you, what role do you think a social network amongst like these entrepreneurs plays? You know, when you're developing an idea, is it good to surround yourself with other entrepreneurs who are thinking the same way, and maybe just, I guess, sort of feed off that energy and then develop a solution?
I think it's really, I think it's very important. Gang could probably share more with you since he's in the mill, and he's constantly surrounded by entrepreneurs. I have, you know, my own private network, yeah, I think it's really important, especially if you're working in social entrepreneurship, because frankly, as Gang mentioned, you're going to be excluded for doing social entrepreneurship by some people that just aren't going to have any faith in what you're doing, because they just have been taught that, oh, if you're doing anything that's good for anyone, you can't also be making a profit or having a respectable business or whatever. So so making sure that you include yourself by surrounding yourself with talented people who feel the same way and have the same priorities as far as making a social impact, I think is really valuable and important. And just frankly, for morale boosting purposes, you know, it's just really important to surround yourself with people who will encourage you and who share your ideals and your commitment to social impact.
Yeah, I guess going off of that, Gang, well, how did you sort of use that network, or if you had a sort of network of social entrepreneurs or just entrepreneurs who were motivated, by a social cause, how did you sort of leverage that network into obviously growing Civic Champs?
Yeah, I mean, I would say I didn't have a strong network to start, but it is helpful for sure to surround yourself. So, now, I serve on the board of our local United Way. And so you get to meet a number of like-minded folks. And that has been very helpful. And, we serve as an example, I'm a huge believer in what Nejla mentioned around, experiencing and being, part of these, what your stakeholders, in terms of at least volunteering across various, like a habitat build and, going to like the food pantry or whatever it is. I think that's where you do learn and you build a lot of empathy that way. That's one of the things that I think I've gotten more and more excited about what we do at Civic Champs is the power of volunteerism and sort of generosity to help bridge societal divisions, if you will, right? So there's very few things that people from different backgrounds and social economic backgrounds in particular, right, can come together, do something, feel really good about it and about each other, right? And so that I think has been really great and has been a source of energy and sort of drive for us as well.
Right. Well, do you think there were any other, this is general, you started startups before this, but what were the resources available to you, in general, to help really build your startup?
Sure. So I think all your networks will always come into play. And so, for example, my co-founder was my college roommate for 4 years, right? So talking about like a very, tight network in that sense. And of course, there's a lot of privilege, right, in terms of my background that, I should acknowledge, right? But, when you do friends and family fundraising, right, it helps to have Harvard Business School classmates that are doing well, right, and can write, angel investment checks, right, and so that is definitely helpful, right, and they're gonna be in investment communities that can give you guidance that tell you things like, hey, if they weren't your friend, they might not be as direct around like, well, here's the issues that I see with your pitch deck or why this message, you are serving nonprofits and here's what you have to do to overcome my internal biases, right? And so those are all things that have been super helpful from, my friends and supporters, obviously recognizing that is not available to everyone, right?
Right. And when you sort of got the idea of Civic Champs, what were some of the first steps you took? Did you sort of, gather a team around you? And did you sort of go on from there, or how did you sort of look at that?
Yeah, I'm a team first sort of person. And so, I'm, I think lots of students like to think about going into, for example, management consulting. And so they often ask, what do you optimize for in your studies? And so I always said, pick an engagement manager that is a great people developer. So for me, it's always about, who is it that you work with? And so, I started, looking for people that would share my excitement about the idea and trying selling them about the vision. And so my co-founders in particular, right, were folks that I found, right? So Mike is, we've known each other for 15 years, right? And we were roommates for a long time and, all of that. So it also makes it more fun, I think, to work on something with people you enjoy. Right?
Yeah, no, I definitely think, working with people and you have a good time with, that's definitely good for the business. Nejla, I also wanted to ask you, I know you sort of mentioned this in the Mandela program that there's some psychological obstacles that entrepreneurs sometimes face. or just in general? Can you touch a little bit about what exactly that is and how people can deal with that?
Sure. I'm trying to remember the psychological challenges that you're thinking of.
Yeah, I think it was more about like burnout. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I can talk about that a little, like psychological challenges. Yeah, you know, for anyone in any kind of entrepreneurship field, they're going to have psychological challenges because obviously it's a very it's an unstable environment. You have a lot less security than with a career job, and you know, I think surrounding yourself with people is really important. I was lucky to have a dad who was an entrepreneur, and so I had grown up around that, and had some. I basically just from seeing him kind of gave me the confidence to live that kind of lifestyle. But I know it can seem really daunting for people, especially if you have kids. I also don't have kids, and so I feel like I can take more risks, right, and feel a little less guilty. I mean, I am risking the welfare of my dog, but she forgives me if I don't make all the best decisions. And but yeah, I mean, there is a lot of risk. You know, I think you know, really to me that's why social entrepreneurship is really where I practice, is because at the end of the day, for me, if it's not having a larger impact on society, I probably wouldn't be motivated, frankly, to do it for very long, because I'm too much of a philosopher. I'd be constantly asking myself why, and what does all this mean? What is all this for, right? So I think that's why social entrepreneurship is, you know, it's sort of inherently motivating if you know that you know, you're helping people. And you know, in Gung's case, he's working with nonprofits, so you know, his bottom line is all good stuff. And at the end of the day, you know, with what I'm doing, I've got here a good example of a sustainable business social entrepreneurship company method. They also broke a business model, right? They actually did research and found that people are not willing to pay a price premium to save the planet when they're cleaning their house, which is not really surprising to me. And so they just decided to make the best product on the market. It smells the best, it looks the best, and it works the best. And it's at a reasonable price, right? And so that's an example of breaking the business model that I'm talking about, right? So now after Method, every company out there is having to ask themselves, how can we smell better? How can we be better from the planet? How might, you know, and so yeah, I guess, yeah, I guess, I forgot the question now.
The psychological
I hope I
obstacles.
answered it.
No, yeah, no, definitely.
Psychological obstacles.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
Yeah,
yeah,
you
I think in general, if you're in social entrepreneurship, as long as you're doing things, I mean, to me, that makes the psychological part a lot easier, because you know, at the end of the day, you're doing something that's good. And to me, that helps a lot of psychological, that would help with a lot of psychological challenges.
Yeah, I think you also talked a little bit about this, but when you're sort of, you know, having a social enterprise, like how are you measuring, you know, the social impact you have? Is it like the number of lives you've affected, or, you know, in real estate, you talked about net zero, or like, you know, positive impact? Like how are you sort of measuring that?
Yeah, well, as a quantitative analytic person myself, having done data analysis and with a math background, to me, like these are the most exciting questions, right? What are all the ways, what are all the quantitative indicators we can gather and start measuring, and how can we analyze which quantitative indicators are, you know, most indicative of social impact? More importantly, I would want to know, how are we tracking the harm we're doing? How are we making sure that we're not passing on externalities to society and to the planet, right? How are we making sure we're doing true accounting? So yeah, I mean, to me, these are the really exciting questions that I really like to dig deep into.
Got it.
So
And
to answer your question, sorry, for my own real estate development, like I said, instead of focusing on numbers, I'm focusing more on the business model and trying
Right.
to, raise the bar and go, okay, my impact is going to be to show people that you can do this a lot better than people are doing it now. And
Mhm.
whether that means I make a certain amount of money or I impact this many people live in my development or whatever, that's not really what I'm going for. I like I said, I want to break the industry. I've got a higher or a lower standard depending on how you look at things.
Yeah, no, I like the analogy breaking the industry. I think that's a good way to put it. Gung, is that also something you sort of look at, when you're measuring social impact? Is it the or number of organizations you're partnered with, how many people are sort of using your app? How do you sort of measure the impact you're having with Civic Champs?
So a cheat for us is there is the B impact assessment. So they're the ones that do the certified B Corp, and you don't have to be certified or go through the full process, but they actually have it's a very long and extensive assessment, and it gives you a grade or a score, and so you have to score a certain amount to be certified. But it also highlights the gaps, right? To say, hey, they'll ask you something, things like, do you have a recycling policy for the company, right? Like, oh no, you don't. Well, maybe you should think about it, right? Or do you currently, are you in a building that is, energy net neutral, or or do you have policies in place that are promoting diversity and inclusion, and within your workforce, right? So that's one of the tools that we use, right? And so you can see our score and our assessment in our annual reports. We use that as part of our sort of transparent reporting, if you will, on how we're doing. But for us, apart from the assessment, I think about two things. So one is certainly acts of kindness, right? So volunteering at the end of the day is an act of kindness. And so are we able to promote or support more acts of kindness, right? Individual acts, whether that's, for example, we have a program here in Bloomington called Helping Hands that we launched during the pandemic that has drivers provide food pickup from like a local food pantry, and they deliver it to households, right? So that would be an act of kindness, and we would track that, and we would say, hey, that's part of our impact. But more broadly, one of the things I'd love to do, and we're not quite there yet, is the reason you track volunteer hours and engagement as a nonprofit is you're ultimately trying to track impact in some small sense, right? The volunteering hours is really a poor approximation of the actual impact at the end of what happened, right? And so for a habitat, it's how many families were you able to provide housing security for, right? Maybe for a food pantry, it's how many meals, right? Now they track some of those impact metrics as well, but we'd love to help them with that piece of it, right? To communicate not just how many hours and acts of kindness people have done, but truly what result happened from those acts of kindness. And that's a little bit harder, but that's certainly the path that we'd love to be on.
Right, got it. And I think this is sort of like my last follow-on question before we go to any audience questions. But how do you fund and sustain, social enterprise? What's your revenue model exactly?
Good question. So our core business model is a very standard SaaS B2B. So SaaS stands for software as a service, B2B, business to business. So we sell directly to nonprofits. They pay a subscription fee, monthly or annual, to us to use the platform. In addition, we have a new product that helps provide more donations to the nonprofits by activating some of the volunteers as donors. Oftentimes, what you'll see is that despite the fact that studies show that volunteers are twice as likely to donate, they're often not asked, right? Because there's not an easy way to make the ask. You don't really know if the volunteer is happy or not. And so we solve a bunch of those problems. And so we're hoping that that drives a more democratic funding pool, right, as well for the nonprofit. And then so from there, our plan on that side is to have a tip model, right? That says like, hey, you know, that fundraising tool is free, but if you want to support us, like you do Wikipedia, right? You can tip us. And then the last bucket is what I'll call strategic partnerships. And so we have a partnership with Mentor National out of Boston. And so they're a big customer of ours, and they get funding from foundations and whatnot, but that can be sort of a larger funding source for us too. Right.
Got it. Thank you so much for answering. Yeah, now we'll move on to any questions the audience has. If you all have any questions, you can just put it in the Q&A chat and I can probably read it out. So the first one is, if you had unlimited resources, what is a problem you would love to try to solve as a social entrepreneur? I guess we can start off with Nejla and then we'll go to Wang.
If I had unlimited resources, I would probably want, I think there's a lot of potential in fintech, in financial tech, in the finance industry, and doing good there, simply because I think that's one of the industries doing some of the most harm in our world today. So to me, it's a pretty easy place to make an impact to change things for the good.
I totally thought you were going to pick a climate change topic, but I'm going to pick, I'm actually very aligned. So if I had infinite resources, I would do something about generational wealth. And so that's, I think, for me, one of the biggest societal problems that we face is this growing wealth gap. And so a very random idea, I'll toss it out there in case there's aspiring social entrepreneurs that want to take it and run with it. But I'd love to do like a private equity for good model where you run by businesses, but you actually give away the underlying equity, right? The resources or assets that generate wealth to communities that need it, right? Or the people that can benefit from it, right? And so instead of, because you can't shift the wealth gap other than taxation, right? But that's a structural problem we can solve separately. There's no way to shrink that gap if you don't have the equity or the assets that actually generate more wealth, right? So that's what I'd love to work on if I had unlimited resources.
Yeah, no, I think both are really great ideas and obviously something to think about in the future as well. The second question, we can start off with Wang and then go to Nejla, was what is your biggest entrepreneurship failure and how did you recover from it?
It's a good question.
I can go first if you want.
No, it's fine. I got. So I'll do, the first thing that comes to mind is I did try to do something in college. It totally failed. Right, didn't work at all. We lost not a ton of money, but some money, and then I would say, you know, not super long story, so won't go in details, but you know, as we were trying to sort of give the company or sell the company, if you will. We just didn't do enough due diligence on the potential buyer, and that was a hard lesson for, you know, for two fairly trusting young aspiring entrepreneurs to learn. And so, you know, just, you know, luckily nothing bad happened. There was no like legal issues, but it was just a hard lesson to learn.
Yeah. And
yeah, so my answer to this is not having enough confidence, because I actually did a round to develop this project before a few years ago, and I had just convinced myself that I needed to have people from a certain financial background on the team, and I ended up surrounding myself with people who had a lot of experience in finance, but not necessarily the same ideals and values that I have. And you know, yeah, hopefully there are people out there that have those skills and the same values. But what I kind of learned over the last few years was that I really didn't need those people in the first place, that I could do it by myself. I have found, at least for my development, there's community development financial institutions, or CDFIs, who fund real estate projects that are socially beneficial. And I've had, the people from these places telling me I could do it, telling me they're willing to work with me. But like, I had it in my head, that, oh, okay, if I can just get one or two of these people, who, for instance, worked at McKinsey, right? Like you, I thought, oh, if I can just get these, people on board. And I found out after working a few years at that I was sort of, chasing geese, and I frankly didn't need them to do what I wanted to do, because I have all the ideas and I've got the funding. So, there's really not much you need besides that.
Right. No, that's great.
Confidence is important, and recognizing that not everyone on your team is valuable just because of their resume. If their ideals and their values aren't the same as yours, it's frankly not going to be a good fit, no matter what the resume says.
Right. No, I completely agree. I think you have to have a good fit and personality with the person you're working with. Only then will sort of be productive. And this one is for Wang, but it's a pretty long question. So I understand that Civic Champs is a management program app for nonprofits. My question is, why is Civic Champs a closed system and not something available to the public? On your website, it says, request demo. And if you guys aren't targeting internationally, would making Civic Champs public help those in other countries? Yeah, I guess that's the question.
So the short answer is those are tech hurdles that we have not yet solved.
Okay.
And so we're working on that. So we don't have self-service today. And so thus you need to have a demo, and we need to set up your account and make it for you and onboard you and all of that. And so the next step for us right now is to make it self-service, so you can go online, make an account, sign up and all of that without talking to a person. And so that doesn't exist today. And so we'd love to do that, make it sort of quote unquote public. You can download the app though. So for volunteers, it's always free. You can use it, right, however you like. And then international, again, that's a technical hurdle, right? So short answer is, if you think about when you optimize systems, they can run faster. And so when you say, hey, I'm only going to do Google Maps for the US, then you don't have to look at all the rest of the world, right? And you say, hey, I'm going to do phone numbers, and I'm going to assume they're all US numbers, right? So they're +1, but not some international numbers. So for registrations, you don't have to worry as much, right? Plus, international, there are some questions around exporting technology, right? So we are a US tech company, and so there's legal things that we'd have to consider if we were to offer our services internationally. So long story short is, we'd love to. We've had to turn down sort of NGOs that are international that were interested in using us, but it's just not something that we can take on today.
Got it. Okay, this question is from Raghav, and he asks, were there any influential figures in your life that sort of, instilled that mentality of, being entrepreneurial and helping other people? I guess we can start off with Nejla.
Well, I would have to mention my dad. He is an entrepreneur, and he definitely taught me that you can be successful in business and not sacrifice your values. It's not always easy, it's not always popular, but it's certainly possible. And in my experience, it's more rewarding. And then I secondly would probably choose Bill Cook, our local entrepreneur from Bloomington, who started Cook Medical. I really admire the fact that he came along and rescued all these beautiful downtown buildings that we have, including the Showers building. The mill, I think, might have been even a Cook purchase. I mean, this one guy basically has preserved, pretty much some of the, what I would consider some of the nicest, most charming local architecture that we have in Bloomington. And so I think that's really inspiring. And Cook Medical actually opened a new plant in Indianapolis. I forget the neighborhood. Is it called Arlington Park? Maybe, I don't know. Don't quote me on that. But anyway, they opened a new plant in Cook Medical, and they found that it was in a food desert. And there, I think, was 200,000 or 300,000 people in the neighborhood without access to fresh food. And the CEO of Cook, he actually partnered with a couple of young men who are from that neighborhood. It was a recent story in the newspaper, but he found a couple of young men in that neighborhood who are men of color, and they're from that neighborhood, and they had been running a local grocery store, just trying to stay in business, just doing what they can for their local neighborhood. And he decided to come in and really just boost their business. And now they're opening a multi-million-dollar grocery store that's going to be run by these two guys. And I think in 10 or 15 years, they're going to become the owners as well. So that's that's real impact. And again, to me, that's breaking the model, because that tells other companies, oh, you want to do something good for the community? Why don't you try something that's, a little more up here instead of down here? So yeah, I would say Bill Cook and my dad.
Yeah, and Gong. Oh.
Yeah, I guess I would shout out my parents as well. And so in high school, I remember my father, my grandparents, or my grandfather was born in sort of a rural village in China, so super poor. My great grandfather actually died from a famine, right, in that community. And so when I was in high school, I remember my dad set up a small fund to provide education to the kids there that might not otherwise be going to school. So we bought school supplies, had stipends for some of the teachers so they can teach, and then had two sort of scholarships, right? And then we said one's for a boy and one's for a girl, right? So like you can't just give it to two boys or whatever, right? And so I thought that was really neat and inspiring. I actually remember we got our local Rotary Club to donate. My student council put in $1,000, which was crazy at the time. And so so some of that stuck with me. My mom worked in lots of jobs, but her last one before retirement was at a home that served adults with sort of developmental disabilities, right? And so I was a certified nursing assistant at the time, so we actually shared coworkers who would work at both the nursing home and at the facility. But I just thought that was awesome that like she, for her sort of last leg of her career was, wanted to do something that truly helped people, right? Like as a primary caregiver. And so yeah, I think those are definitely things that inspired me.
Right. No, I think a lot of parents have inspired their children to do things that are not so ordinary, but I think they deserve a shout out. So, and yeah, this question is also interesting because both of you are based out of Bloomington, but Keel asks, do you need to be in places like Silicon Valley to be successful in social entrepreneurship? And I guess Gong, you can start, and then we'll go to Nejla.
I sure hope not. I think you can. There are benefits to being in the Valley, but there's also benefits to being in Bloomington, right? So especially now, you can really recruit anywhere. And so our team, we only have 3 people in Bloomington. We have 4 people in Pittsburgh. We have 1 person in Michigan, 1 in North Carolina, and one that just moved to Geneva, right? But and a couple devs in the Ukraine, and so it's all very remote, and so I think that has made it much more accessible for companies like Civic Champs that are based in Bloomington to recruit the talent that you might get from somewhere like like a Silicon Valley right now. network effects are definitely real. And so, you will miss out on some of that, right? From some of these other ecosystems.
Got it. And yeah, this question is for Nejla, but Marcos asks, the concept of sustainability feels a lot more obvious and clear in some industries, like energy. Do you believe that some spaces are inherently more sustainable than others, or is there some catching up to do across the board?
Yes, I feel that some industries are more sustainable than others. I can't remember the name of the guy right now, but there's a pretty well-known guy. He owned a carpet company, and he became one of the most sustainable business people. And he basically figured out, I think back in the 90s, he said, some industries just shouldn't exist, right? If you can't make a product without, if you can't make it in a sustainable way, then that industry probably shouldn't exist. So I definitely think some industries are more sustainable than others as far as that's concerned. But then the challenge would be, right, can you enter those industries and make them sustainable? Right. And so I would say if you're, if your interest is in an industry that you think is inherently unsustainable, then I would find that even more of a reason to go into it as a challenge to see how, what good you can do. And, and to steer that into a more sustainable model. But you definitely, I'm sure, I say definitely some industries are more sustainable than others. Yes.
Right. Okay. And this is our final question. This is to Gang. It says, what drove you from consulting to startups and, from general startups to more socially impactful startups?
Yeah, drove me. I don't know if drove me. I mentioned I was interested in entrepreneurship even in college and decided to do consulting afterwards. So I think it was always something I wanted to do. Part of it is the same reason I liked consulting and why I like entrepreneurship is that you are your own boss. I like many entrepreneurs, I think I tend to chafe a little bit under authority, if you will. And so consulting is helpful because it's a very small team, right? Right. So you really own the work that you do, and as an entrepreneur, even more so. And then socially impactful startups, I think, Niraj mentioned earlier, right? There's certain psychological challenges to being an entrepreneur, right? And you have tough days, right? That can be very lonely, right? And all these things. And so having something that you can believe in, I thought was, could be really helpful, right? As part of that journey. And again, I've had the fortunate luck, right? To have done several things that have panned out and worked well. And so, I felt I had a bit more options, if you will, right, to do something that could be impactful for the world. And and some of you may have my wife as a professor. She's at Kelly, right, and so having that kind of support base, right, is also incredible, right, and she's definitely the breadwinner at this point for our household. But it allows me to sort of take bigger risks and do the things I love, right? And so I'm not sure that fully answers the question, but that's how I feel.
Right, and I guess this is just a concluding statement, but for both of you, if there's a piece of advice you could give to the attendees, most of these are sophomores or juniors in college, what would you tell them? We can start off with Nejla.
My biggest piece of advice is to trust yourself, trust your judgment, and take those risks. You just got to take risks. You just have to. And taking them when you're younger, I suppose, is better than taking them when you're older. I've taken a lot of risks in my life. I've done a lot of different things. Some people would say, what were you thinking? Look at your resume. It doesn't make any sense. And I don't regret any of those decisions. I say take a risk, and yeah, I mean, it's your life, you know, you're the only one who has to really be happy with it. And that's something that is hard for people, I think, sometimes in business and entrepreneurship to remember, because it's such a hyper competitive environment, especially if you're in Silicon Valley, especially if you're at a top 10 business school, right? It's not necessarily hyper competitive everywhere, but it can be. And I think it can be really tough for people to remember their individualism and remember that that is the benefit of being in entrepreneurship, is that you really get to do things yourself and you're the boss and you get to decide, you know, what your standards are. So make them high.
Right.
Yeah, I would largely echo that. I think that's, you know, that's great advice. And you know, maybe my wording slightly different, right? It's just to say, have confidence in yourself, right? To believe in yourself. Much harder to do in practice, I realize. But if you think about your life in general, even, you know, up to college today, and you look back at 10-year-old you, 5-year-old you, at any given time, I bet if you said, hey, I wish I could have been more confident as a, you know, as a kid, right? If I look, you know what I know today, man, I should have just been more confident. I would have been a better friend. I would have been, you know, all of these things, right? Having self-confidence is so powerful. And, you know, I'll share just an anecdote real quickly, right? So, you know, I didn't have confidence necessarily when I was in college, right? So again, easier said than done. But I actually, you know, when I took the offer at McKinsey, I reneged an offer with Shell, which is where I was at before. And so in part, you know, I don't regret the decision itself in terms of like, was that the better choice? Like, absolutely. But I shouldn't never have taken that first offer. And the only reason I did is because I didn't have confidence in myself to say, oh, I know I'll find another job, right? Like, forget their exploding offer letter or whatever, right? So it's just like, I think believing in yourself goes a long ways, especially in the long run. And you always have a choice, right? So.
All right. Thank you so much, both of you. I think that's really great advice. And yeah, with that, I think this wraps up our panel. I really want to thank the panelists for taking the time out of their day and really providing some good insight into social entrepreneurship and entrepreneurship in general. I'm sure the attendees also learned something. So yeah, with that, we can show the slides, and if anyone wants to follow up with either Gang or Nejla, here are their emails and contact information. You feel free to reach them at that, and then yeah, also follow the union board to stay tuned with any new events that are coming up. Thank you all for attending. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Yeah, thanks. I enjoyed it.